Thanks for joining us for episode number 2 of Calm Class with Mr. Quinn. And on today's episode, we'll be dealing with the differences between social media and mediated communication versus face-to-face communication. And we'll also take a look at 5 common myths associated with communicating. It's interesting to note the differences between social media and mediated communication versus face-to-face communication. And we try so hard with social media and with mediated communication that takes place between two electronic devices. We try so hard to replicate the same understandings and feelings and sort of the same energy and intentionality that goes into face-to-face communication. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. Here are some differences to note between social media and media communication versus face-to-face communication interactions, or the face-to-face sharing of meanings and exchange of symbols. The first one is interactivity. And typically, when there's a face-to-face, typically might not be the best word to use in this. But for example, think of an argument that two people are having. Say a couple is having an argument in a mall. Now you can look at the argument. You can even speak with someone close to you about the argument. But in most cases, you're not going to join into the argument that the two people are having in a public place. Now, social media arguments are different. I'm sure we all know of people who have gone on Facebook rants or Twitter rants. And it's really easy because the platform is so large and so many people are connected to it. It's really easy for someone else to jump in or to take sides or to chime in with their 2 cents worth in the argument that's occurring on Facebook or Twitter or any social media platform. So the platform of social media and even mediated communication allows for a greater interactivity. And quite often, people don't feel bad about jumping into arguments or conversations that occur on social media. Social media and mediated communication also offers a temporal structure. And the temporal structure really is talking about the time that it takes for the response and the communication exchange to occur. For example, you send someone a text message or you send someone a direct message on Facebook and Twitter. The thought line is when you send that message out, the person sending the message expects you to respond quickly because it's different. I grew up in a time where, as a teenager, you would go to summer camp and you would meet someone at summer camp, maybe someone that you liked, and you would actually write a letter to that person. So that meant finding something to write with, a pen or a pencil, finding something to write on a piece of paper, crafting your letter, thinking what words are you going to use to paint a picture or to create meaning, and then folding that letter up, addressing that letter, putting a stamp on that letter, taking that letter to the post office or leaving it in the mailbox for the mailman, waiting for that letter to be delivered, then waiting for the person who you sent the letter to open the letter and read the letter and decode your meanings and write you a letter in response. That could take days or weeks or sometimes months, depending on what's going on in the person's life. But this is different. When I send you an email, I'm expecting a quick response. I think business, from a business standpoint, business etiquette standpoint at least, if I send you an email, I expect you to respond at least in a day or in a day or two at max. But the temporal structure of social media and mediated communication says that person should respond very quickly. A challenge to social media and mediated communication are the social cues. And the social cues are the things that you take notice in face-to-face communication. For example, in face-to-face communication, if I'm saying something that you don't like, I can tell by the expression on your face or your body language. Or if I'm joking, you can tell by my mannerisms or even my tone of voice that I'm really joking. But sometimes in social media and mediated communication, I can't pass on those same social cues to you. So I have to use emoticons or emojis or use abbreviations like JK for I'm just kidding, or LOL for I'm laughing out loud at this comment, so don't take the comment too seriously. Or I'm really angry, I'm yelling at you, so I'm typing in all caps. So sometimes social media and mediated communication leaves us without those social cues, and we have to use different symbols to translate or to give off the same meaning. Another difference is the replicability of the mediated and social media. Now, if you have an argument with someone, a lot of times we forget what the argument is about, right? And the argument could go on for months, and you say, well, what were we arguing about? And after a while, one or both parties forgets what we were actually arguing about. But with social media and mediated communication, the messages stay until they're deleted. So if you had an argument with someone last week on Twitter or on Facebook, or someone had a rude comment on your Instagram photo, that comment or exchange will stay there until it's deleted, which brings us to the idea of storage. If I'm yelling at you, if I'm arguing with you, I can store that in my mind, but often that fades away, as we were talking about with replicability. But with storage, I can take a picture of it if it's on my screen on my iPhone. I can cut and paste it into an email. I can keep the exchange for as long as I want to, which is harder to do in face-to-face communication. And unless you do it with some kind of recording device or someone who is sitting down to take notes on what you're talking about. There's also reach. There's this thing about when you put a video out, especially on YouTube, about going viral. Viral is referring to the reach of the communication exchange. And the reach is global, really, when you think about it. If I have a conversation with you face to face, our reach is limited. It's just you and I or whoever's a bystander or listening to our conversation. But if I record that conversation and I upload it to YouTube, or I record an Instagram video or a Vine, that potentially has the possibility to reach around the world. And then there's mobility, the ability to take the communication with you. Most of us have mobile devices. We have cell phones. We have tablets and iPads. So we can talk or we can communicate quickly and on the go versus the more traditional forms of communication. If you can't talk, you can talk face to face when there are two people there. But if there are not two people there, it's hard. You have to coordinate schedules and arrange. And we're trying things now with technology, with video conferencing and with cell phone and phone conferencing to make communication more mobile. Now, the last thing we need to talk about are the myths of communication. There are some things that we commonly think about communicating, which aren't true. Let's go ahead and bust some of these myths right now. The first one is communication fixes everything. And I think a challenge to this is when we look at talk shows or we look at sitcoms. If the two parties in argument or disagreement sit down and have a conversation or come to an understanding, by the end of the program or by the end of the talk show, people think that they have everything worked out just because they have a conversation. But just because you're talking or communicating or sharing meanings or trying to develop an understanding doesn't mean that it fixes everything. Quite often in the case of arguments, depending on the parties involved and the attitudes and the energy level, the more you talk, the more heated an argument gets, the more misunderstanding occurs, and the more you don't communicate well. So the myth is communication fixes everything. Just because you talk about it or send a letter or share or try to share an understanding, everything is not going to work out fine in the end just because you talked about it. Another myth is that more is more, is that by talking more, you're actually communicating more. And that's very connected to the first one. So the myth is people who talk a lot actually are better communicators, which is not true. Just because you're talking or you're sharing symbols audibly doesn't mean the quality of your communication is great. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're understood. And sometimes the best thing that you can do in a communication exchange is be quiet. So more is not more, or more is not always more when it comes down to communicating. A third myth is the meaning is in the words that you're using. And that is so not true. The meaning is not in the words, or maybe we should say it differently. The meaning is not only limited to the words that we use. For example, let's use the term beast. If I say a particular basketball player, say LeBron James or Kobe Bryant, if I say they're a beast, what picture develops in your mind? Some of you may think that I'm using a derogatory statement or trying to put them down. But when I say that LeBron or Kobe, that they're beasts, what I'm saying is that they're operating at top level, at optimum level. They're going all out when they're on the court. They're holding nothing back. So it's actually a positive affirmation that I'm trying to use by using the term beast. But depending on your context and your worldview, you could see it a different way. So the meaning is not just in the words. The meaning is in the experience and the context of both the person, the sender, and the receiver of the communication. Another myth, this is a myth. Another myth is that we have a natural ability to communicate. And we think that just because we have the tools, just because we develop the ability to talk or develop the ability to write, then we have a natural ability to communicate. But that's just not true. We all have to learn the rules, and most of us get them wrong because most of us have arguments and disagreements. So we may have the natural material or tools like the ability to talk, and we develop the ability to write, but we're not all naturally able to communicate or naturally able to communicate well. We all have to work on it. And this is a big myth, maybe one of the biggest myths in communication. And we hear it in courtrooms all the time. When someone makes a statement, someone will say, strike that. The judge will say, strike that from the record, as if you can take back what has been said. But you can't. And someone said this a while ago, I don't remember exactly who, that words are like toothpaste. Once you squeeze it out of the tube, you have a hard time trying to get it actually back in the tube. Once you say something, or you give a facial expression, or you dress a certain way, or you write something down, you can't take that communication back. It's out there. So we got to be very careful with what we say and how we communicate with individuals. And it's not as simple as we make it out to be sometimes, but the truth is, with hard work, with effort, with determination, with intentionality, we can all be better communicators.